So hello everyone, back again with me, Sir Julius. So for today, we will learn about static electricity. So, without further ado, let us start our lesson today. So we've already known that all of the object is consist of atom. Now, we've already know about the atom. So this is the picture of one atom. So in one atom, it has nucleus, and then the electrons is orbiting around the nucleus. So if we see the nucleus, each nucleus is contain protons and neutrons. Okay, so meanwhile, the electron is orbit around nucleus. Okay, so we've already learned about it. So there are three. The first one is electrons, second one is protons, meanwhile the third one is neutrons. So for electrons, electron is negatively charged, meanwhile protons is positive charge, and neutrons is no charge. It has no charge, so it's neutral. So we've already learned about it last week. So we've already learned about object that is positively charged. So what does that mean? So atoms can be positively charged when the amount of protons is greater than electrons. Or we can say that atoms is lose electrons. And then we say that something is negatively charged when the amount of protons is less than electrons. So when the amount of protons is less than electrons, the atoms will be negatively charged, or we can say that the atoms is gain electrons. So we've already learned that our universe is always try to make something balanced. So when we have a positively charged object or negatively charged object, our universe is always try to make that object neutral. So how can we make the positively charged object or negatively charged object become neutral? So remember, when we have something that is positively charged, it means that the electrons in that object is less than proton. So it has less electron. Meanwhile, for negatively charged object, it has a lot of electrons. So how to make it neutral? Both of it neutral. So the electrons from negatively charged object move to the positively charged object. So it will create a balance in the electrons and protons. So that's how our universe is make everything balanced. So to create a balance, electrons will be moving. But the real question will be, why do electrons move? Not protons or not neutron. So the electrons being the tiniest, the lightest, and the fastest. So electron is tiny, light, and then fast. So the electrons is very vulnerable even to a little bit of attraction or repulsion or disturbances. So electrons is easier to move than the protons. So the electrons always move when something is in imbalance condition. So it is easier for them to move between atoms, meanwhile protons is more stable than electrons. So that's why electrons move, because it is very tiny, light and fast, and very vulnerable to the disturbances. And the protons is not moving because it's more stable than electrons. Okay, so that's why electrons move. Okay, so now I will explain to you two terms that we must know in this static electricity. The first one is called insulator material. So most solid materials are classified as insulators because they offer very large resistance to the flow of electric current. So in insulator, there will be a large resistance to the flow of electric current. So in insulator material, the electrons can't move freely. That's the key. Electrons can move freely. This is the example of insulator material: glass, silk, plastic, wool cloth. And then for the second one, we call it conductor materials. So conductor materials is usually comprised of metals. Because metals are classified as conductors because their outer electrons are not tightly bound. So the electrons can move freely. So that is the difference between insulator and conductor. So in insulator, the electrons can't move freely. So they are resistant to flow of electric current. Meanwhile in conductor, because the electrons can move freely, they are not resistant to the flow of electric current. Okay, so actually we know the difference between insulator material and conductor material. Now we will learn about the methods of charging. So we can make an object become positively charged or negatively charged. So how can we do it? Okay, so there are three methods of charging. The first one is called charging by friction. So how does it works? So charging by friction is when we rub two objects, so the electrons will be moved from one object to another object. So we have one object become negatively charged because the electron is moved to it, and the second object will be positively charged because the electron from that object is moved to another object. So this is what we call charging by friction. In charging by friction, the movement of the electrons is depend on the material. The electrons will move from wool cloth to plastic rod. And then, if the object is wool cloth and ebonite, the electrons will move from wool cloth to ebonite. And if the object is glass rod and silk cloth, the electrons will move from glass rod to silk cloth. This charging by friction is used for insulators material. Okay, so why the movement of the electrons depend on the material? But the movement of the electrons is depend on the what we call as triboelectric series. So this is the example of triboelectric series. So the material, one material, is more positively charged than the other material. So the electrons will move to it. So we can see the movement of the electrons according to this triboelectric series. Now we will go to our next method. Our next method is charging by conduction. So what is charging by conduction? So charging by conduction is a charged object is touched to the conductive material, and some of the charge, whether it is positive or negative, will be transferred. So when charging by friction is for insulator material, but charging by conduction, we must use a conductor material. So this is the example of charging a neutral object by conduction. So when we have something conductive material, that is positively charged or negatively charged, we can just touch it to another object, another conductive material. So upon touching, the charge will be transferred. So when we have a negatively charged object, when we touch it to metal, the metal will be negatively charged also. Okay, so for the next one is charging by induction. So in the induction process, a charged object is brought near but not touch the neutral object. So when we brought a charged object near a neutral material, the electrons and protons in neutral material will be separated. So in the example, if we brought a tube with positive charge, and when we brought it near the neutral material, the electrons will move from right to left. So we have left material will be negatively charged, meanwhile the right side of that material will be positively charged. So after the charge is separated, we can do grounding. So after we do grounding, the object will be negatively charged or positively charged. So that's how we do induction method. Okay, so that's it for today. I will see you again next time. Bye.